Well, I would like to welcome everyone to the Lane Lyceum tonight. We are very, very excited to have Reverend Erika from Dallas, Texas, with us tonight, brought to us by Amy Littlefield, who grew up in Needham. And so we're just thrilled to have the two of them share their experiences with reproductive rights down in Texas and across the country. The Lane Lyceum are something that was started many years ago at the UU Church in Needham. And it's something that we've continued because they are a form of discussion and sharing of ideas that, on topics that really matter to people. And this certainly is one of those that matters tremendously to so many. So we're thrilled to have Amy and Reverend Erika here, and I'm going to introduce Tracy Zinner will introduce both of them to the group. But I would like to, before I do that, I would ask people mute their computers so that we don't get background noise. And for anybody who is new to the Lyceum or would like to know about further Lyceum, and they're on all different topics, if you would like to receive an email letting you know that they're coming up, you can put your email in the chat, and I will put you on the mailing list for future. We actually have two more coming up in the next 2 weeks. So okay, so please feel free to do that. And Tracy, it's all yours.
Thank you. And happy to see all of you here. And just wanted to take a few moments to introduce these incredible women who are joining us today. Reverend Erika Ferguson is an interfaith minister, and Amy Littlefield is a reproductive health journalist. And they're going to be bringing us an important conversation on what it means to bring our faith to the front line in the fight for reproductive justice. Amy will be interviewing Reverend Erika about her work and how her journeys with Texas abortion patients are part of a robust legacy of faith leaders supporting reproductive freedom. And it dates back to the years before Roe v. Wade. Reverend Erika has been an interfaith minister for 20 years, and her ministry focuses on reproductive health, rights, and justice. She's leading the charge in Texas as the lead in the Tubman Travel Project, which aids those seeking abortion care outside of Texas into New Mexico. She completed a trip today. She was recently awarded the Oscar Romero Award for Rothko Chapel for her courageous work. And Amy Littlefield, hometown journalist who has been an advocate and focused on reproductive health care and abortion access correspondent for The Nation. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tracy, and thank you, Amy. It is so cool to be at my hometown parish and to be with you all. One of the undercurrents of my journalism is debunking the idea that, thanks to the religious right, is very deeply rooted, that somehow conservatives have a monopoly on faith, and that faith is not an instrument of liberation, right? And so no one embodies that message more than this remarkable woman before you, Reverend Erika Ferguson. And I am just delighted that I got to be part of facilitating bringing her into this community to share her work. I've just completed an article about Reverend Erika that's going to be in an upcoming special issue of The Nation magazine. So I know all of the funny and embarrassing stories that I will be asking her to tell about her courageous trips with abortion seekers from Texas. Before I introduce Reverend Erika, I want to just give a brief overview of kind of the lay of the land when it comes to abortion access. And I'll do what I always do and start by sharing the map. And you can't really understand the landscape of abortion access today without looking at this visual of this map of the United States. This map shows you these states in dark red are states that have banned abortion. And what I really want people to understand is that 10 of these states are in this brick wall right across the South, stretching east and north from Texas. Now, the states in orange and yellow are states with varying degrees of restrictions. And this next slide is a more up-to-date map from just a few days ago, because we've had some really important developments in recent days. North Carolina has overrode a governor's veto and passed a 12-week abortion ban. Florida, where of course Ron DeSantis has just thrown his hat officially into the ring, has passed a 6-week ban. And South Carolina is in the process of considering a 6-week ban. And so what you can see from this map is that this entire swath of the South and the Midwest has essentially gone dark when it comes to abortion access. And so I'd ask you to imagine what it's like to wake up one day in the heart of Texas or in Tennessee or Mississippi. And if you find yourself pregnant and don't want to be, what an absolutely Herculean effort it would take to even contemplate getting to one of these states that's in blue. The other piece that I want to emphasize, because I know Reverend Erika is often humble about her work and she may not mention it, is just the tremendous courage that undergirds her decision to travel with people who need abortions. Because not only is Texas at the forefront of restricting abortion, let's remember they were a state that banned abortion at around 6 weeks before the Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade last summer. But they are also at the forefront of trying to punish anyone who tries to help someone get an abortion. And the 6-week ban in Texas that allows civil lawsuits against anyone who aids or abets an abortion is one example. Another example is that a few months ago, we saw a lawsuit filed by major conservative law firms against 3 women who helped a friend to get abortion pills and self-manage an abortion. Those friends are now facing accusations of murder and lawsuits demanding more than $1 million each because they helped a friend who was trying to leave and divorce her husband, and they helped her to get the pills that she needed to end her pregnancy. So that is a backdrop to the work that Reverend Erika is doing. And so I want to turn it over to Reverend Erika to talk about the life experience and the faith background that brought her into this work of promoting reproductive freedom.
Wow, thanks, Amy. That's quite the introduction. It's so funny when you live your life, you don't think about what it sounds like to other people. As they've said, I'm Reverend Erika, and I'd like to start by talking briefly about the 2 abortions that I had. And I always start that way. When I had my own independent church, I talked very bluntly from the pulpit about having 2 abortions. And I always say those 2 abortions saved my life. And that's important because for this story, which is still unfolding, it's those 2 abortions that became the foundation for which not only my career, but actually my entire life centered around. And I had my first abortion when I was 14. And then I had my second abortion when I was 18. Both times I was able to go to the clinic that was literally down the road from my house. It was maybe 3 miles. And both times, both visits when I had the abortions, I was able to go without any holdup. I was able to have clinic staff help me fill out paperwork so that I could have those abortions paid for. I was able to have my abortions, and go home without calling a parent or talking to anyone else. And what is more important than that was that both times the volunteers, who I couldn't tell you their names and don't know them and wouldn't probably be able to point them out, both times it was the volunteers and staff at the clinic that made the critical, they were the critical piece in my having an experience that made me feel safe and cared for and trusted, and they handled it with dignity. And because of that, I decided that I would volunteer when I was 18. And so I started volunteering. And I answered the phone to help other women get to the clinic and find out and tell them what they needed, just like someone had helped me. I kept volunteering, and at that time, maybe a couple of years later, as things began to heat up intensely around the abortion, health, rights, and justice issues, I started volunteering for an organization called Operation Escort. And in California, believe it or not, in the Bay Area at that time, there were no distance laws. And so people, the opposition, as we call them now, were able to come to the cars where women were getting out to go into the clinic and harass them from the time they got out of the car till the time they walked in. This is in California, in Berkeley. And I was, at the time, by then, I was 6 months pregnant, and I had on an Operation Escort vest, which was like lime green. You couldn't miss me. And I was also 6 months pregnant. And I was escorting women in. An incident happened where one of the opposition, they were often very volatile, yelling, screaming, all of that kind of stuff. But one of the people from the opposition spit on me. And I was so furious, call it hormones, but it's also probably my personality. I was so furious that I made an internal vow. And I use that word vow intentionally. I made an internal vow, and I was 22, that I would do this work for the rest of my life, some way, somehow, because of their hatred and because of how violent and just awful they were. Little did I know, when you make a vow, it has a way of hanging on. And so over time, I became a teacher, but I always found myself in the work of reproductive justice in some way, shape, or form. Fast forward, I moved to Texas over a decade ago and decide to open a church, an independent church, one that would allow people from all religions and no religions to come. And no one told me that that's not done in Texas, but nevertheless, I decided to do it anyway. And for 6 years, I was the founding and lead minister. And at that time, we had lots of people coming to our church who were young people because I think partly because they weren't shamed or didn't get stigma and they weren't treated badly. And it was a real relaxed atmosphere. But I often talked about the abortions, and I often talked about the dignity and the right to have a life that you want, and that God or the universe, whatever name you choose to call that which is greater, wanted your freedom and was on the side of justice. Over a course of time, those talks got lots of attention, and I ended up working in policy around reproductive rights. And in Texas, working on policy is a very special animal. I think I would call that God's work more than being a minister. But I did lots of protests, lots of testifying, lots of work. And when SB 8, which is the Senate Bill 8, which was what got us to the Supreme Court, Texas is always known for doing Texas-sized things. I became one of the individual lead plaintiffs on that case. that went to the Supreme Court. Very few clergy, particularly Black queer identified women in Texas, as you can imagine, speak openly about their abortions. I happen to be one of them. And as a result of that work and working on that case, and with the work that I was doing with an organization that focused on reproductive rights, that coupled with my private practice, which focused solely on reproductive rights and how a family moves through that process from decision to having or not, and what the family does. That's what my private practice was, to work with families to make those decisions. Coupled with all of that, I ended up becoming very much involved in what was going to happen after Senate Bill 8 went into effect. And so I worked with lots of young people, and as you may have guessed, young people tend to use text messaging as their main form of communication. And that's fine with me. I have 5 children myself, ages 30 to 18. So I get the text thing. At midnight, when SB 8 went into effect, one young girl I was doing a lot of work with to make the decision about whether she was going to carry the pregnancy or end it, sent me a text, and I still have it. It was exactly at midnight. And she said, "How am I going to get out of this state? I can't even figure out how to get a bus across town." And it was in that moment I said, "Don't worry, I will help you." I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do that, but I knew that I would. And the rest, as they like to say, is history. I started working with Daniel Cantor, who is the senior minister at First UU in Dallas and has been for 20 years, who has been involved in working with the clinic, Southwestern's Women's Clinic, for years and has an amazing relationship with them. He asked me if I was willing to fly with a group of women out of the state into New Mexico. And of course I said yes. And that was shortly after SB 8 went into effect. We were still trying to figure out what it all meant. But even though we didn't know what it all meant, we decided we were going to make it happen anyway. That trip, I took 25 women, which was no small feat, from the church where they met at 5 a.m. to the airport, to the clinic where there were protesters, and they all received their procedures, all 25. And then we got back on the plane and flew back. That was the beginning of what will become and has become the Tubman Travel Project. And the reason it's called the Tubman Travel Project, and as you may guess, and those of you who know slave history, Harriet Tubman was part of the Underground Railroad. One of the things that I think is important is that if you look at a map, and I'm saying this because Amy showed a map, but if you look at a map, the actual map of what is happening with states that now have no access, that map, if you take and overlay the Underground Railroad, the same states are the states in the South that Harriet Tubman and many other abolitionists and freedom fighters worked to get people out. It's the exact same states. I am sure that's not a coincidence. So, needless to say, we call it the Tubman Travel Project. And in Texas, once the decision was handed down by the Supreme Court, we took a couple of weeks to figure out if we were going to do it, if we could do it, and how we were going to do it. We decided that we were going to keep doing the travel project, but that it was going to have to take on a completely different look. It was going to have to go deeply underground, and we were going to have to figure out how to communicate in ways where we wouldn't be found out. And we weren't sure how that was going to happen. But what you see here on the slide are pictures of us making the Tubman Travel Project happen. You see on the very first picture on the left-hand side, one of the travelers on their way back from New Mexico. The blanket they have are blankets that we give them because obviously they're tired, they're cold by the time they get done with their procedure. The next picture is a room that we've set up that has cots, it has blankets, it has a water fountain, and they're able to come in after they leave the clinic. And I'll tell you the whole process. And they're able to rest and get lunch. The next picture in the center is of some of the travelers getting back on the plane, heading back to Dallas. And the last picture is, if you can imagine an office in a 100-year-old building that has 2 rooms, there's lots of fluorescent light, it's old, it's kind of funky. We decided that we wanted to, based on my experience as a teacher, turn those 2 rooms into what felt like a beautiful home welcoming environment. And we know best practices in education, if you make a classroom look more like a home environment, children feel cared for, they're relaxed, they're able to be themselves. And so we decided to add lamps and a sofa and take out the fluorescent lighting and turn the 2 rooms into rooms that felt really like you were walking into maybe your aunt's living room where you could relax after going through a medical procedure. And so those are the pictures, those are the images from the Tubman Travel Project, just so you get a sense. What happens for the travelers now is that the Southwestern Women's Clinic has closed. And obviously there are no abortions being done in the state of Texas. But what it also has done was make it very difficult for women to get the sonograms and the workup that they need in order to even find out how pregnant they are and in order to find out what they need to do. And so what we found out was that the clinic was going to close and it was going to make it very difficult for those that we take to find a place to get their sonograms and to get their pregnancy tests and confirm their pregnancies along with the dates. I had the idea that we could open up a mini clinic. We're going to call it a pregnancy resource center. It will be the first of its kind that is pro-choice. And it will, when we went to the doctor at Southwestern's Women's Clinic, who we have a relationship with in New Mexico, he was thrilled with the idea. Obviously, he opened the clinic to be an abortion clinic. And since the Texas wouldn't allow that, he could not keep it open. But he was so thrilled with the idea of us being able to do sonograms and blood workup and make sure that women could find out how to access abortion care outside the state, that he agreed to donate the equipment so that we could use that. And he's leasing us a space. And so what we're going to be doing is, if all goes well, and this is under confidentiality, we will be opening a what we will call the Truth Center for Choice. And it will allow clients to get their sonograms and to find out how far they are along and to have access to resources outside the state. So those are the 2 projects that I'm currently working on. Both of those projects have lots of legal ramifications. Both of them have challenges. What I can tell you, and then I will share some of the stories of what it's like to travel. The lawyers that obviously are looking at the project for its legality and to help keep me hopefully out of jail are thrilled with the idea, because of the fact that within 1 year, our resource center will be able to petition the state for funding. Right now, the state of Texas funds crisis pregnancy centers. We all know that they're run by churches and that they are not pro-choice. They are actually underground pregnancy centers that keep women from choosing abortion. Well, the state funds those. And if we apply for that same funding, because technically we are a resource center, if we're denied, we have a case that we can take to the Supreme Court. And if we are denied and the case wins in the Supreme Court, it could potentially lead to closing all of the crisis pregnancy centers in the state of Texas. So there's something bigger at work here. But that's not the big take home. The big take home, I mean, those are all great things and those are wonderful. But the big take home is, what is it like to be on the ground working to get women the healthcare access they need outside the state? Well, as you can imagine, many of the women have never even traveled outside the state before. Quite a few have never flown before and would really, honestly, not be able to navigate travel, let alone coordinate getting to a clinic in another state by themselves. It would be impossible. Many of them are minors. I mean, and not to insult any of the women that travel, but just trying to navigate an airport, and I do it all the time, can be confusing. So it would be very difficult for them. The accompaniment that I provide allows them the security and safety of knowing they're not alone. Keep in mind, they are traveling by themselves into another state that they've never been in. If something were to happen to them, many of their families don't know they're there, and also how would they even get to them in time? I want to tell you a little bit of a couple of stories. One particular poignant story was when I was traveling with a group, and I've been doing this since June. Oh, next month it'll be a year. One of the girls had never flown before, was deathly afraid of dogs. That particular day, the airport was training German Shepherds for their routine security. She was scared out of her mind, both of flying and of dogs, and she was also very, very sick. We were walking through and she didn't think she could do it. She peed on herself and she stopped cold in the middle of where the dogs were being trained and basically crumpled to the floor. As you can imagine, I'm trying to not call attention to this group. And she was so scared, just terrified, really. And she'd only known me 20 minutes. And I said, you have got to trust me. I'm going to get you to the other state and I'm going to get you back here. If you think you can do it, but all that you have right now is your trust you put in me. Somehow, some way, she was able to pull it together. We were able to get through security and we were able to get her the medical care that she needed. There are lots of stories that are not as dramatic as that one, but there are other stories that are painful. One particular trip, I took the group, they'd all had their procedures. And as you can imagine, they come back to the office groggy and crampy, not comfortable at all. I mean, it's a procedure. One of them had a son who's, they were at home with their father being taken care of. He was at home. He called, upset. The baby is crying. Was 3 years old. He had been bit in the face by a dog. He was bleeding profusely. I mean, as a 3-year-old, and a dog bite, it was bad. She's looking at him on the screen. She's screaming. She's completely horrified. All of the other women are now upset. She's saying to her boyfriend, you need to call an ambulance. We need to call emergency. And he said, no, I'm not. And she was just beside herself. And she said, why? He said, I am a Black man whose son just got bit by a dog. Do you think that they're not going to question me? What do you think could happen to me if I call the police? She understood what he meant, and I understood what he meant. She was helpless. The girls were helpless. We could not get a flight back soon enough. Somehow I was able to convince him to take the child to the neighbors and let the neighbors call 911. And that's what he did. But I couldn't help think about the fact that if she had been in Dallas, she would have been able to get home. We would have been able to get her home. Those are the kind of hard stories. I had one other girl that had her procedure, and for some reason, unusually so, the office called her and said, you have an ectopic pregnancy as well. You need to go to the emergency right now. And she said, I'm 17. My parents don't know I'm in this state. There's no way I can go to a hospital. And we had to make the decision whether she should get on the plane. It was a tough decision. And honestly, I was scared. I had someone's child. I asked her, do you think you can fly? And she said, I have to. We got on the plane and we made it back. She called her parents and they took her to the hospital. Those are the kinds of stories that are so horrific and so hard and so painful. But I also want to tell you some other stories, some stories of what happens when the girls come together and meet each other for the first time. You see, they have within 5 or 10 minutes, a bond. They're about to embark on a shared experience, the likes of which they're not even sure what's going to happen because, well, human trafficking is real and they don't know me. All they receive is a text message telling them to meet some strange person. I have to quickly make some kind of connection. And I'm able to do that just because I'm a mom and I've had abortions and because I care. But more importantly, what happens is they make a connection with each other. And by the time we get through security and onto the plane, they have shared each other's numbers and they're talking and sharing stories with each other. And by the time we get back on that plane, well, they've already begun a friendship. I've had text messages and emails from one girl who met another one. They decided to become roommates, and she was in an abusive relationship, and she was able to leave her abusive relationship with her child because she met this other girl, and they were able to get an apartment together. Lots of other girls go to the laundromat together. They share babysitting with each other. What is actually happening is this deep, subversive community that becomes family. And they find camaraderie and connection with each other. And more importantly, they have lots of them decided they wanted to help in some way, shape, or form. And as a result of that, we put together these stickers because they wanted business cards. And I said, why don't we create stickers that you guys can put up everywhere you go that has a QR code so that other people can find the program. Every single girl that comes and gets their procedure, they are thrilled to be able to do something to help. It's an interesting time here in the South. There is a lot of upset and trauma about what's happening for women in terms of being able to get their procedures and access to medical care. But what I do know is that people are resourceful. And through all of this, we have been able to create a program and a community that will probably do things we can't even imagine. And so while it is difficult and it is challenging in navigating all of the potential dangers and upset, it's hard, but it's not impossible. And this is a long distance run that we're in down here. And so I want to make sure that not only do you understand what's going on the ground for a program like ours, which so far we've found out is the only one that's successfully doing it for the last year. It's hard, but it's not impossible. And there is some amazing things happening as a result of it. There's some amazing triumphs that are happening as a result of it. Many of the girls, some of them break down in tears because they have said things like, I never imagined complete strangers would care about what happens to me. The program also happens to be able to provide a massage therapist and herbalist. So when the girls come, they're able to get some herbal teas for different symptoms. They're also able to get some Reiki treatment or massages. And they have heating pads that are made by volunteers from all over the country, and blankets, and they get meals. And it's pretty amazing because you don't really know what it took to get to the airport. But what I do know is that by the end of the day, they leave feeling like they are cared for and that they have the possibility of their lives going on the way they want it to. One of the things that I tell them as we get back to the New Mexico airport on the way out is I say goodbye to them as we're in line. And many of them are, of course, attached and wondering. Many of them know, they have an idea that what I'm doing is probably illegal. But I tell them that I'm saying goodbye to them in New Mexico, because when we get off that plane in Texas, I don't really know whether or not there'll be police there. And we didn't go through all of this for them to get involved in anything that could jeopardize their future. So I say goodbye and I tell them no matter what they see happen to me, that they keep going, because that's the entire point of the project, is that they keep going to the lives of freedom that they want. So that's a little bit about the program. We are we're really putting it together, and we keep finding new ways to make it happen through ice storms and all kinds of craziness. I'll leave you with a funny story. I happen to have, as you imagine, it's hard for some of them to get there. Some of them can take Uber, some of them buses, all kinds of ways they get to the airport. And sometimes they're very late. I take pride in the fact that I've never left anyone. But this particular time, one of the travelers was very late, so late that, and she didn't have documentation. She didn't have an ID. I figured out ways to get around that. I won't bore you with those details, but we were so late that I took off my shoes, put them in my bag in order to run, she and I, through the airport to catch the flight. We didn't make that flight. I lost my shoe, and apparently, unbeknownst to me, you can't get on a plane without shoes. My husband was an hour away. There were no shoes in the airport. She'd never flown before, so there was no way I was going to leave her. Well, I managed to find a pair of socks, and she managed to concoct a scheme with a blanket that she had to divert the agent's attention so that I could get on the plane with my socks on. Turns out I didn't have shoes for the rest of the day. But it was in that moment, after I realized I'd lost my shoe and they were my favorite pair of shoes, that I would be willing to do just about anything to make sure these women got the chance that I got. And while I don't know if any of the volunteers that helped me when I was young would be doing what I'm doing, I do know it's because of them that I do the work that I do now. So it's not always horrific. Sometimes it's really quite hilarious. I think that's pretty much all I want to share. Amy, there's a couple of slides. There was one slide in there, and we can slip that in a little bit towards the end as people are asking questions, I think. But I'd love to open it up to hear your thoughts, your questions, get anything you'd like to share or anything at all.
And Reverend Erika, while people are, letting that incredible series of stories you told sit and preparing their questions, I want to just emphasize how unusual Reverend Erika is. When SB 8, the 6-week ban, passed in Texas and went into effect in September 2021, again, Roe v. Wade was still the law of the land. And so Texas was this isolated case, and it was an emergency from the day that law went into effect. A month after it went into effect, I met Reverend Erika at the Women's March in Washington, D.C. She stood on stage and said, We are going to fight until this hell freezes over, and then we are going to fight on the ice. And I was like, who is this woman? And she told me the story about helping the young woman leave the state because she was past 6 weeks and could no longer access an abortion in Texas. This is the young woman who texted her at midnight the day the law went into effect. And at that time, all of the clinics in Texas had stopped performing abortions after 6 weeks. They were complying to the letter of the law because they were terrified that if they violated it, they would be sued $10,000 for every violation, and it could run them into the ground. Groups based outside of the state of Texas that are very well funded were saying, we don't want any involvement in anything that could seem to violate this law. And here's Reverend Erika looking me in the eye and telling a reporter with a recorder pointed at her, yes, I broke this law. Yes, I aided or abetted. Yes, I broke the law, and I did it because I am serving a higher moral purpose. And so I want to ask you, Reverend Erika, to talk more, because you speak about it so powerfully, the connection between what you do and faith. And that is part of a robust tradition that we don't often talk about. The clergy consultation service on abortion in the years before Roe helped as many as 500,000 women who needed abortions. They helped them find safe providers. They negotiated lower prices because they were so powerful. They could keep the prices low and keep the illegal abortion providers safe and honest and affordable. They operated out in the open in defiance of the law because, like you, they were serving a higher purpose. And I would love to hear you reflect on that. And then we'll go to the audience questions.
Sure. One thing I can say is that I believe people of faith, not just clergy, but people of faith have, we have a history of fighting for what's right at the cost of our own well-being. Clergy are, of course, at the forefront of that because there's a vow, right? There is a vow that we take to serve those that need care the most. And when you think about it, when you think of all of the great mystics and leaders, King or Gandhi or anyone, they understood that in reality, it is my faith that makes me whole. It is the faith that sustains us. And that if our lives should end in pursuit of our vow, in service of those that need us the most, can you think of any other more noble reason or noble way to not be here? I often say we do all know how the game is going to end. But for me, it is my faith that guides and sustains me when things seem impossible because, well, that's what clergy do. That's what people of faith do. They take the risk because there is something that compels you to take the risk. And I dare say, talking to all of the clergy I've ever known and people of faith, we couldn't really live with ourselves if we didn't sacrifice or be willing to live and move on that faith. And that's what is so powerful. It isn't religion or doctrine or dogma. It is a belief in something greater. Some call it humanity, some call it the love presence, but whatever that is, that is greater, it will guide us and it will sustain us and it will uplift us and it will transform us. And I think that is really the essence of what a clergy's role is. I think that's the essence of what the clergy consultation services knew back then.
Thank you, Reverend Erika. And I see the first question is about how to help. So I'm going to share this slide here.
So thank you. Let me tell you, there are 3 ways to help. And I want to be clear. This is a little text message from someone named Carly who said, and she wasn't, when I take people, there's no talk of God because I don't know what their religious background or preference is. But what I do know is that no matter what religion you are, when you open your heart and when you show up lovingly to help, well, people feel that. So she said, I appreciate each one and God bless you guys, which I thought was fascinating because it's not, we never say anything about religion. We simply try to show up with faith and with love and with compassion. Everything else sort of finds its place. So I always ask for donations, and it's necessary for several reasons. Typically, the status quo is to donate to a 501c3, and it's funneled through those channels. One of the challenges that will become very clear for many, many organizations, and probably has, is that you can't use 501c3 money for anything that could potentially be considered illegal. So we are having to find unique and alternative ways to help fund some of the program. But we do have a 501c3 status. The UU Church of Dallas has a donation button. That's what that is. And it will allow donations and resources to go to the traditional route, and you'll receive a receipt so that you can write it off on your taxes. There's also two other ways that you can donate. One, as you may guess, it's very difficult to get a paycheck for this work because technically it's illegal, and people don't like to pay people who are doing things that are criminal, potentially. So I have a private donation that will allow me to keep doing the work so that I can, feed myself and keep the lights on. Then there's also a donation, and that's the middle one, that will allow you to provide direct support to the travel day itself. Oftentimes, we have women who can't afford to buy something to eat at the airport. And so if we have some cash, I can purchase food for them. It's not anything, it's airport food, but they have to eat before they get on the plane because as soon as we land, they go right to the clinic. And eating helps deal with their nausea. So if you want to donate to that, you can certainly do that. So there's three ways to support the work that I do. One is for me personally, that's the top link. One is for those that may need donations for food and bottles of water because they're shocked that they have to throw their water away before we go through security. And then obviously you can donate to the Dallas UU as we get together the program and open the pregnancy center. And that's a traditional channel of donation.
Right.
I'm just looking at some of the other questions in the chat. Dina says, well, I know there is a higher power. Thank you for all that you do, Reverend Erika. My concern is about security and safety. Are you worried about the wrong audience having access to the QR code? I was even surprised that this event sent a direct link to the Zoom rather than asking for folks to register. Do you want to speak to that?
The reality is this. At some point, the opposition is going to discover what we're doing. There is absolutely no way that we could keep this forever a secret, right? It's not possible, even using high tech. There would be no way for us to let the travelers, the girls, know that we exist if we didn't, because we can't use traditional advertising. So the risk is there, but this QR code takes them directly to a site in New Mexico. So that's a little additional layer. It's a sticker that's for Texas, but they access all of the information and support technically through New Mexico. And that's how we get around that. In terms of me, well, I mean, the church does have a law firm that will take my case pro bono in the event that I am arrested. Listen, I made the decision a long time ago to do this work, and I've been doing it. it has taken on in Texas a different tenor and tone. When the 3 women were arrested, we knew about it before. Well, when they were going to be arrested, we knew that that was going to happen. They were going to charge them. And my husband said, so you're still in, aren't you? And I said, yeah, I'm still in. We all have to assess our willingness, what level of risk we are willing to take. I understand that. I happen to be one of those people who's had a life that, well, I feel it's my moral duty and my calling to do this work. So I'm not as risk averse. And besides, when you meet some of these travelers and you hear their stories, how could I not help?
Amazing.
Andrea asks, how far into Texas do you reach, and are there programs in other states that you're aware of?
Well, we are the only one in Texas, we know that's doing it well. Obviously, there might be 1 or 2 women can get there by themselves through abortion funds. I am in the process, since I now have a year's worth of data, and data is good, of being able to take the clergy consultation service program that was in the 60s, and clergy have been working to launch it again. But we didn't have any data of what it looked like in practical application. Well, now I have the data. So my work will also be to launch this nationally, but we'll first start with the no access states. There are different challenges in Louisiana and Alabama that we'll have to work out, but it is scalable. It is doable. So right now the program is in Dallas. I hope to launch in 6 months in Houston, and perhaps San Antonio. And that will allow travelers to get to those major cities so that we can then get them on flights and get them there. We are also going to add an additional day. As you may know, the mifepristone pill, we call it Miffy, is in question all over the country. But right now, it looks like I will be able to add an additional travel day to take those that are just getting the pill, the abortion pill. They will be able to access the pill, and I will do the same process as I do with those that are doing the surgical abortions. So that will be really good.
I hope folks have more questions. Feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat. And Reverend Eric, I wanted to ask you to elaborate on that point about mifepristone. So for folks who don't know, the most popular method of abortion in the United States now is medication abortion. It's a regimen where you take mifepristone and then 24 to 48 hours later take misoprostol. Those 2 medications combined together have a high effectiveness rate at ending a pregnancy and basically inducing a miscarriage. What we've seen is a concerted effort by anti-abortion strategists to try to target mifepristone, most recently by trying to forum shop and find a judge in Texas who is an avowed anti-abortion activist and advocate, who was willing to indulge the argument that the Food and Drug Administration should never have approved mifepristone 23 years ago when it first came on the market. That case was heard recently again at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a notoriously conservative appeals court that anyone in Texas, that Reverend Eric is nodding her head, is very familiar with. It's very likely that it's going to end up being decided by the Supreme Court. And that case is potentially would have ripple effects on access to medication abortion in every state. So those of us sitting in Massachusetts can sometimes start to feel complacent about, how comparatively easy things seem to be here with a state legislature that's protecting access to abortion. But Reverend Eric, I'd like to know what you want people in states like Massachusetts to understand. Because one message is that abortion is not safe anywhere, that a threat to abortion in any state in the country threatens us everywhere. And Texas restrictions do not stay in Texas, even though that's where that federal judge who heard the Mifepristone case resides. Tell us what you would like people like us who live in the states that are blue on that map I showed earlier to understand about this crisis and our role.
Well, I have this idea here that the work that we're doing and all of the fighting that we're doing is not really for us, right? I mean, I've had my 2 abortions, I've got my kids, it's not for me. The work that we're doing now, the fight that we're fighting now is for children that aren't even born yet. It's for our grandchildren. And that we have to all be all in, that it isn't just about, even though I know lots of messaging is that this impacts those that are most marginalized the most. The reality is, as it's starting to emerge and become clear, this is impacting everyone because everyone has a reproductive justice story. Everyone has a reproductive story, whether you're male or female, rich or poor, white or black, everyone has a reproductive story. And that story can be impacted by the laws that are being handed down. And so it's like, instead of centering those most impacted, the reality is all of us are impacted because I want my grandchildren to be able to have the access that I had. So I'm impacted because my grandchildren, cross my fingers, there will be some, need to have the freedom to choose. And so the work is not just for me. It's never really been for me, and it's not really for us anymore, the work that we're doing. And why it's important for us to pay attention and for us to be involved is because there is law creep. And that's what we're seeing with the Miffy pill, is that this decision is going to impact the entire country, which means it impacts everyone. Oh, someone asked, I just saw this, I'm sorry. Someone asked, how are we able to fund this particular project? I think I might have answered that. The Religious Coalition in New Mexico funds that part of it because they have to, right? We can't take any funds from another state to fund the activity we're doing here. And there's also new laws always, they're trying, the state of Texas, I swear, sits down and just tries to think of ways to be horrible sometimes. But there are laws where they are trying to get new laws passed that will make it so that other states can't help in our state. But as of right now, they can. But we have to keep things very separate. So New Mexico funds the travel for the women that fly. And UU is funding my flight ticket. And then we just depend on donations to keep the rest of the program going. And we're doing a big donation campaign to open the Pregnancy Resource Center. I think that answers that. Oh, yeah.
Wendy asked, are women allowed to get the drugs in the mail in Texas?
Allowed? Yes, but technically no. They actually have to go to the state where they can get. So what will happen when I add this additional day, we put together a program where they will come, they will do a telehealth visit with a doctor. He'll give, or he or she will give them a code. There will be a van that has been outfitted with the pills and a special locker. They will be able to access with their code the pills. They can take one and then they can take the other one on their way home when they get home. So it's a complicated thing, but we think we can make it happen. There's also a clinic that does, so one clinic is only doing surgical abortions, and then there's another clinic not far that is doing pill abortions. So I guess basically I'll just have 2 vans and drop maybe a bus and drop some off at the clinic that need surgical abortions and some off at the clinic that need the pill abortion. That's how we're going to do that.
Reverend, can I jump in? How do these young women find you, and how many go with you on the travel days? What is kind of the, how does all that happen?
Well, the internet is a beautiful thing. Now, right now, they're just accessing it via the internet. They'll do a search, like there's sites called like I Need an A. They'll do a search. Before, the Southwestern Women's Clinic was giving them a sheet of paper that had resources. And since that closed, once we open the Pregnancy Resource Center, we'll give them that sheet of paper. Everything will then go through New Mexico, but they have to then contact the clinic. They have to contact the center in New Mexico and the clinic in New Mexico, and we help them get organized and get scheduled and all of the pieces together. So that's how that happens right now, because I'm trying to not, as you imagine, taking a large group like 25 causes a lot of attention. So I keep the groups down to 6. I can do 10. Any more than that, and people start asking questions at the airport.
Do you live in fear that somebody is going to just call and say, here's this big group of women, or I've seen Reverend Erika come through the airport once a week? Do you worry about those kinds of things on a daily basis?
No, because I think at some point you stop worrying about what could happen. You just understand that it's possible, and you just I guess just like breathing, at any given moment anything can happen, right? So it becomes more like that. You just understand this is the agreement you've made. And we did get a verbal, the DA in Dallas County, we met with him, and he said he couldn't guarantee I wouldn't get arrested, but he could guarantee that he wouldn't prosecute as long as he's the DA, as long as we're in Dallas County. So that's why we have to fly out of Dallas County. Yeah. So there's more, there's a little reassurance, Texas police are special sparks. So you just never know. And the opposition, they will eventually find out. I mean, it's just what they do. So we know that will happen eventually.
Are you working to expand the religious support that you have? I know you said that the UU Church in Dallas is, very much involved, but
I actually have 4 other clergy from. This is a really we've really worked to make it be an interfaith collaborative. So I have 2 rabbis, progressive temples, and then I have 2 other clergy that are from Christian churches that are the sort of support should I not be able to travel. They have agreed, and we work together if I need them to go. So I do have backup, and because that's important, right? Because if something happens to me, the point is for the program to keep going. It's not me. It's about keeping the program going. So having clergy that are used to doing it and ready to step up. And that's the whole thing around the clergy consultation, is that they had many clergy from different faiths. So for me, it's critical that this be an interfaith movement. And that is part of what will make it successful for sure.
Cece asked a question in the chat. After taking the pill and a woman miscarries, if she needs medical help, can she get into legal trouble? And Reverend Erika, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You live in Texas, but my understanding of the law is that Texas and many other states have taken care to, at least on paper, exempt the pregnant person themselves from punishment, because it's not a good look for them to be punishing pregnant people directly.
Right.
So the risk, for example, in the case we talked about earlier, where 3 friends are being sued for over $1 million for an accused of murder and wrongful death by right-wing abortion opponents who are bringing this case, the woman who actually self-managed her own abortion, who took the pills and had the abortion in Texas, is not a target of that. Her friends are.
That's right. That is exactly
that, her life has been disrupted by her, ex-husband, sharing her text messages with the world, and her friends having their lives disrupted by this nightmare. But it's
That is exactly right.
there's only a few states where self-managed abortion is actually a crime.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that states like Texas aren't constantly thinking up creative ways to punish people for their pregnancy outcomes, especially when they're women of color.
And here's the thing that I think is particularly harmful about the laws is that the laws seek to isolate and silo, right? So a woman is pregnant and she can't no longer can even tell her friends. So now she's really alone, which is why our program seeks to change that, right? It's like you're not alone, actually. And here are people that are willing to risk and be with you on this journey. And that's really important because the law, not only is it, just absurd, but the ramifications of the way it silos women and almost makes them afraid to talk to anyone that could help them is particularly, I think, damaging.
And it is what they were banking on, right? I mean, the architects of these laws knew that they would never need to file 1 million lawsuits.
Right.
And they've hardly filed. There's been only a couple, and none of them have come from within the anti-abortion movement because the fear was the point. The chilling effect was the point.
Right.
Clinics complied, even out-of-state funders that fund abortions complied. And so that's why I think it is so remarkable, because by you refusing to comply and doing so outwardly, they don't have an answer to that.
Right.
There's nothing in the anti-abortion playbook that allows for people who
defy what they think is going to happen. And that's the important thing, right? Is that we have to push as hard as we can. And the only way to do that is to risk. That's the only way to do that. So, yeah. It says some of the messaging going out to emergency medicine providers is not to ask women. Oh, yeah, that's good. That's good wording. I think part of the other thing is this is why the Pregnancy Resource Center will become so critical, because we're planning to create a sense of community, a place where you can go to get real answers, where you don't feel alone, no matter what you decide, right? Because that takes away the isolation, and that isolation is where fear grows. And so to have a Pregnancy Resource Center, a real one, takes that away.
I think that's a very good point, Tracy. And I'd be curious if that messaging is going out nationally or in every state, because a lot of times when people are criminalized for their pregnancy outcomes, it's because of something they've said to a healthcare provider. And it's because a nurse or a doctor, feels the need to intervene and inform the authorities, lest the medical facility have some sort of liability or complicity there.
Right. Right. Good.
Okay.
I want to invite folks to submit more questions if you have them, or to raise your hand or shout it out. I did want to say, Reverend Erika, I used to work for Amy Goodman at Democracy Now!, and there was something she would do towards the end of every single interview, and that is that she would ask a question that might feel a little, I don't know, out of tune with our times, but I think it's an important one. And she would ask the question, what gives you hope? And so I would love to hear that from you, and to leave folks with a sense of empowerment around what they can do, and how they can, practice hope as a practice, not as a feeling. What does that look like for you? What brings you hope and keeps you in the work?
Well, it's interesting. I have been working on some writing that I hope to turn into a book, and it's called Vow 2073. And the idea is that 50 years from now, things will be significantly different. But it won't be unless all of us are willing to take a vow. And the reason I think a vow is more important than a manifesto or a promise or an agreement or a pledge, because it's sacred. So everywhere I've been going, I've actually been asking the group before I end if they would be willing to take a vow with me. And so what I ask them to do is place your hand over your heart. And you don't have to unmute your microphones. It's that piece, right? It's this thing that we take, this vow. And you can repeat after me. I promise to do everything that I can
to do everything that I can
to fight for reproductive justice.
to fight for reproductive justice.
This is my sacred vow.
This is my sacred vow.
And that is what gives me hope, because I believe that a vow supersedes a law and it supersedes fear. As a matter of fact, I know it does.
And Reverend Erika, for folks who may not be familiar with the term, can you tell us what reproductive justice means?
Reproductive justice is a term that was coined by what we call the founding mothers of the movement, 12 Black women who convened, got together during a conference, and they developed a working definition for reproductive justice, which is the right to have children, to parent those children in safe, sustainable communities, and the right to choose. We are actually in conversations about adding to that definition, but that definition is what it means to be in justice, to work for justice around reproductive freedom.
Reverend Erika, do you have any concerns? We've recorded this, but do you have concerns about us posting this because it could be used against you?
Well, as Amy knows, all the stuff I talk about is all over the internet anyway. So at this point, you know how you get so far in, like when you're raising kids, you can't turn back now. That's kind of the way it is. I don't think about those things. I understand what the deal is. And so, no. We're going to announce a pregnancy center and we're going to keep moving forward. It is what it is. Amy's coming out with an article. It is what it is.
Amy, I wanted to ask you, what got you your focus into reproductive justice?
Oh, I did not expect to be in the hot seat. But
That's a great question.
You know, my dad is here in this space, and I can remember having a conversation with him as a teenager when I first found out what abortion was. And I was, for a brief and awkward period of time in my teenage years, very pro-life, very anti-abortion. And I can remember my dad saying to me, and bless him for being very patient and not, because it all could have gone wrong in that moment if he had been too heavy-handed. He said, the reason that I am pro-choice is that women of means will always be able to get safe abortions, and people who do not have money will die. And things have changed now. There is access to medication abortion. It is not always a question of life or death in the same way that it was before Roe v. Wade. And it took a little while, it took me a little while, but I think I internalized that message. I think for me, it's part of an understanding that if women and people who are capable of pregnancy are going to participate fully in the world and live their dreams, then this is a necessary first step. It's not the only one. Reproductive justice tells us abortion on its own is never enough, that society has to add to that, offer far more. But it has become a passion for me. And I never knew when I started covering this issue 10 years ago, and I'm sure Reverend Erika didn't know when she started in this work, that we were going to end up in this place where we are today. But I'm very grateful to be in community with all of you and with her.
Well, and we appreciate so much, Reverend Erika, what you're doing. It is such a courageous, stance that you're taking, and we need people like you, Amy, to get the message out, to make sure that people around the country are aware of what's going on and what are the repercussions. I do see one other question. Have other denominations taken a position regarding reproductive justice?
I can't say that there are other denominations. Well, Catholics for Choice obviously has taken their position. Obviously, the Baptist and other denominations have not. And the Reformed Jews, they take a very strong position. They're very clear. It would be nice to see some more denominations take a very clear stance.
Yeah.
Would be good. Do you work with providers to help make birth control more available? Oh, yeah. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that happens is that obviously when they're at the clinic, they are guided to what form of birth control if they want. And then we also give all of the travelers Plan B to take with them. And then we store some at our at the First UU where they're able to access them anytime, day or night.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I think we'll wrap up. And again, thank you both so much. It has just been, we're kind of isolated here in Massachusetts, and it's so important that we know what's going on. We read the newspapers and we hear what's going on, but to hear it firsthand has just been so invaluable. So thank you both for coming tonight and participating in this Lane Lyceum. It's just amazing work that you do. So
thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
thank you. And again, if anybody wants to be on the mailing list, you can quickly add your name to the chat. I would be happy to let you know about upcoming Lyceums. Next week's is on climate change and what we can do in our homes to make our homes more zero energy use. And then the following week we have Marty Linsky, who is talking about adaptive change and how we can make changes that that make a difference, that really pay attention to how to be adaptive and how to make changes that are good for ourselves or our communities. So we're very excited at all the Lyceums. And again, I just want to say thank you again, both of you. Okay, good night.